Ooh.
Okay. Good morning, Jim. Thank you very much for taking the time to answer a few of my questions. If you could just give me a little bit of background about yourself, specifically with regards to how long you've been an educator and what you teach.
I've been, well, my background is fire, EMT, emergency medical technician, and emergency management, both in the private and in the public sectors. I currently, I left the Nationwide Insurance after 38 years. My last 10, 15 years there were as a disaster catastrophe coordinator. I've been an instructor for Good Fellowship Training and Ambulance Institute for 26, 27 years, as well as I teach fire rescue for the Chester County Department of Emergency Services. I've been there about the same amount of time. So I've transitioned into those roles from my fire and EMS background, so over a quarter century.
And educationally speaking, you have a master's degree, if I'm correct?
Yes, I have a bachelor's degree in organizational leadership and emergency services, and I have a master's degree in emergency management.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the first question.
Bill, yeah. And I'm also a State Fire Academy Pro Board certified fire and life safety educator 1 and 2. So those are national certifications.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I can take my firefighting 1 from you then, right? Yeah, no, I don't think
Not
so.
currently.
No, no, thank you. All right, so these questions that I'm going to ask are essentially about assessments. So in your own words, can you describe what you believe is an assessment?
An assessment it's a testing tool. We all know people learn differently. I'm not one to basically learn out of a book. I pick up some concepts, but I have to do it. But it's a tool, one of a number that we use. It measures a couple things. It can measure understanding. It can measure gaps in learning. It can measure student progress. So, I think it's one of a number of methods that are important to monitor how your students are doing, to keep track of them, and to make sure that you're, no student left behind, that someone is not failing and we're not catching what's going on.
Okay. What components do you believe are present in an assessment? So what do you need to have in an assessment?
Well, number one, your assessment, as we all know, it needs to be vetted. So whatever assessment tool you're using, you have to make sure that it's appropriate to the objectives that you're trying to reach with the student. I had one of my professors when I was taking my bachelor's program, his favorite saying was, "Be careful what you measure." So we have to make sure that it's, appropriate for the subject we're teaching, and we have to make sure that we have to identify what we want the assessment tool to do. What are we looking for in the assessment tool? And we have to make sure that that tool is effective in doing that. And vetting is one of the ways you can do that. Having other people look at your tool, your assessment tool, and make sure that, again, we're measuring what we want to be measuring.
Okay. Well, that kind of answers the next question, which is, what value do you find in assessment?
I think they're important for, as I said, for measuring understanding, for looking for learning gaps, for looking for other areas where you can improve your instructional methods. Every time we give a test for some of the state courses I teach, we always go back and look at the results. And if we consistently have students missing questions 12, 18, and 24, we go back and look at those questions, and then we go back and look at those subject areas, and what are we missing there? Are we not getting the points across that we need to? Do we need to change something that we're doing? So I think it's important to look at these results, not only for how are your students doing, but how are you doing as an instructor in getting the key components of the material transfer to your students.
Okay, well, that again, you're answering questions before I even ask them, which is a great thing. So what to you then is a quality assessment? I think you might have just described that one.
I think one that proves, how, again, kind of recap what I said, how are your students doing? Are they picking up the key things that they need to be picking up? Do we need to be doing something else as far as reviews or changing the way we're teaching subjects? I'm a big believer in reverse classroom, in having the students actively participate in their education. And, I usually go in and look at key parts of the program and make those assignments. And I find that when we do that, the students actually do better on the assessments, because I think it's easier for them to look up the material and present it to their fellow classmates than it is to have me standing up there, killing them with PowerPoint. So we use different methods to instruct, and I think that makes a big difference in our assessment results.
What do you measure in an assessment?
Again, I'm looking for understanding of the key concepts of the course, what's important in the course, what points haven't the students picked up on, what questions do they still have. Again, we go back and look at all of our tests to see if we consistently got large numbers of students missing same questions, we're doing something wrong. We have to change how we deliver. So I'm looking that it goes back to the learning objectives. What are you trying to teach them? What knowledge objectives, what cognitive and practical skills do you want them to have when they come out of the course? And you've got to constantly be comparing those with the results you're seeing from your testing.
Okay. Last question would be, how is online assessment different from face-to-face assessment? And this is a good one in our line of work.
Yeah. Well, we're really getting into this online assessment here. So this is kind of a new field for all of us. I took my entire master's program at Millersville University online. I never showed up in a classroom once. That program was successful for a number of reasons. Number one, the instructors who were teaching it were all subject matter experts. There were people who had been in their fields, not just from an educational, but from a practical experience. The online tools that we had, as far as discussion groups, online assignments, group assignments, all made that program very successful. So again, you can't just be delivering lecture. You've got to have other activities built into that. You've got to have discussion boards where you have to specifically, bring points up, not just say, oh, hey, yeah, John, that was a good point. I agree with you 100%. You have to bring up your own points as well as answer other people's discussions, group projects, group research, papers. I mean, these all roll into the objectives that you're trying to obtain, that you're going to test for. So I think online can be very successful. Now, we know with certain things like our EMT programs, some of the fire rescue programs I teach, you can only go so far, because eventually you've got to see the people perform the skills. Like I said, if you're teaching a Fire 1 program, you can't have somebody pretend there's a fire in their shed and take their garden hose and advance. It's not the same as taking 1.5 inches into a burning building when you're in full gear. So at some point, you've got to have that part of it. Some interesting things that I'm seeing here with our latest COVID-19 is some of the courses I teach. ASHE and ASHE is doing it in particular for the CPR portion. They will actually send you a mannequin to your house, and you can set up a Zoom teleconference with the instructor, and you can actually perform the hands-on skills with the instructor watching you. Now, again, we can't do that with some of the EMT and fire courses, but people are constantly looking to kind of push those borders and those boxes for some of that psychomotor testing. And it's good to see that stuff, because I think we could be doing a lot more in those fields. But again, there's going to be limits. There's only going to be so far we can go with some of this stuff. But why not push the borders as far as we can, and look outside the box for other solutions to some of these issues that we're encountering right now?
Absolutely. Well, that's the end of the formal questions, but on my own, we deal a lot with formative assessments, uh, affectionately known as quizzes, the summative assessment, which is usually the chapter exam or the final exam. But what are your thoughts on, is it possible to assess students as part of the normal everyday education, teaching? Do you find it possible to actually be doing assessments of your students while you're just teaching the material with their interaction? And
Do you mean like doing the chapter quizzes, or while you're actually doing the lectures?
No, while you're doing the lectures, and I'll give you your own example. Would be like the Jeopardy game. It's not really a quiz in the truest sense of what we use quizzes for. It's not a final exam, but that's a great tool that you're still while you're teaching the students using that game. Do you find that to be helpful in a way of assessing students' knowledge?
Sure. Not only assessing their knowledge, but maybe, like with the Jeopardy game, if you've got, let's take your class, your EMT class, you've got 12 people in the room, they're supposedly logged in and paying attention, supposedly. If you're calling on them, or you say up front, all right, today we're going to do a review. I'm going to be calling on you to answer questions. I'm not just going to say, who knows the answer to this? John, this question is yours. So if people know they're going to be called on at some point, I think they're going to tend to, I'm not just going to start this thing and, wander out of the room and come back in and, oh, the session's over, now I can log out. I think you can keep them tuned in that way. And, John might be answering the question and I might be sitting there going, oh, thank gosh, John got that one, because I have no idea what the answer is.
Right.
You stand a chance of making somebody maybe look a little foolish because they don't know it. But, you've got to keep them clued in, because there's a real chance if you're just there talking, it's the same as the classroom. You're there just talking, showing PowerPoints. They're drifting off. Their thoughts are 1,000 miles away. So it keeps them kind of clued in. Plus the fact it's like, oh, I'm glad I didn't get that. Oh, okay, that's the answer to that. So maybe just that fact that you kind of keep them a little bit on edge. You might be getting across some key points that, hey, I didn't know that. I thought I knew that answer, but I had no idea what the answer to that question was. So that's the way I look at it. Some people may have an opposite view of it, but I think it can be useful. If it's where we find ourselves, we have to try to make it the best learning experience that we can, because this is where we're at right now, and this is what we have to deal with.
Yeah, I think this is going to last for a few years, not just a few months. All right, Jim, thank you so much.
I think this is going to change education a lot. So,
sorry, no, I agree with you. But you know what? Those of us that, I did my complete master's degree online. I'm doing my doctorate degree online. There's a different skill set with online learning versus the traditional classroom learning. It's my opinion, you need to be more disciplined with the online learning than you do in the classroom. In the classroom, you can just show up, your body, a plop in the seat, the old meat in the seat.
Yep.
But online, without having the discipline to do your work, there's nobody there pushing you or probing you or trying to pull an answer out of you. So.
And we were doing online presentations for, I loved my online master's program. It was a great experience for me.
Same here. All right.
I think I gained more online than I would have. Sorry.
Let me go ahead here and pause the recording. Thank you very much, Jim.
Okay.